All right, everyone, the red light is on and we are recording. This is Mark back for another episode of the Veteran Semi-Professional. So today's an interview episode where I'm interviewing a veteran about their life and career, either after the military or actually, today's guest is still in the reserve. So kind of, things are still doing in the military. All in effort to help you if you're trying to figure out what do I do once I can put my hands back in my pockets, grow my hair out, and start wearing these things called quote unquote civilian clothes. This is the show for you. So I talked to people about, what were the career paths they took, what were the tactics, procedures, frameworks they use in order to have, successful, post-military or even, during military, if you're considering the reserves, life for them and their family. So super pumped about today's guest. We're going to be talking about search funds, entrepreneurship through acquisition, which is a topic you all know I love to cover. And I've had a number of fantastic guests on this show who've talked about, various flavors of this business model, whether it be, a traditional search fund or self-directed search or franchising, whatever it may be. I'm all about people trying to, acquire their own business to grow it. And Jordan here is going to talk through, how he personally did it. And then also, the company he's working in now can how they help people do it as well. So Jordan, if you take a minute, introduce yourself, man, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's good to be with you. And I'm looking forward to sharing some unique perspectives and how veterans can tap into their skill set and give back to small business and medium-sized business and therefore the broader economy. So just real quick on me, I graduated from undergrad in 2008 and went to New York for several years to work in a few different capacities. First started out in M&A advisory, and then worked with the former Secretary of the Navy under President Reagan, John F. Lehman, to do aerospace defense, government services, and technology investments and acquisitions. So just buying companies outright. So I went from there to business school at Wharton, and with an eye towards coming out and doing a self-funded search to acquire a business. After graduating in 2016, I was doing some independent consulting before fully launching my full-time self-funded search. And in 2017, direct commissioned into the Navy Reserve as an intelligence officer. So January 2018, I launched my full-time self-funded search, concluded it a pretty rough 2.5 years later in July of 2020, purchasing a local government services and technology software company that serves cities, actually. So that was in July 2020. About 2 months after that, I turned around and helped another MBA graduate with buying a business. And that became really the first deal that we supported as Search Investment Group. So I started that firm in essentially the fall of 2020 with 2 other partners. And since then, we've helped 10 people successfully identify, evaluate, and diligence and raise capital for and close deals and become majority owner and CEO of their own business. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to get more into the Search Investment Group and everything you're doing there. And I think that when you and I first spoke, the model of it is super cool. And I think very attractive to anyone who wants to go down this route. I've spoken a lot about search funds. There's pros and cons to every one of these different strategies and everything. But I think, at the end of the day, like your all strategy is very much on how do we get the most equity and the most ownership to the person who's actually like acquiring and running this business, which isn't necessarily how the other models are totally aligned. So I really like that. Like that's kind of how you all are structured, and it's really cool. Well, cool. First, I'm kind of curious because you know a little bit like roundabout way into the military. What was the thought process? I mean, you working up in New York and working for the Secretary of the Navy and going to Wharton and everything. Like I kind of felt like the world was your oyster. What was like, hey, I'm gonna go join the Navy Reserves. Like where did that kind of thought process come?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mark. So I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, and my dad was in the Army, and my grandfather was a captain in the Navy. And I grew up with a lot of those stories, and actually quite a bit of my friends from high school going into the Marine Corps. And so I always had that around me, and it just kind of, life when you're at that young age, it starts taking you in a certain direction. And I think at some point in your life, you realize you actually have a lot more control than you think you do. But before that time, I felt that calling to serve, to do something in uniform. I've always felt that. And one of my classmates at Wharton Business School told me about the Direct Commission Officer program. And I just immediately said, I have to do that no matter what, whether or not it actually affected my entrepreneurial pursuits or career path. That was going to have to be a part of it. So that really was it. I thought I had missed the opportunity to serve. And I thought it was going to be one of those regrets. I was going to die, be on my deathbed and look back and just say, that's something that I regret is never having done that. So it is certainly a roundabout way to do it. At the same time, because I was in that position, I do like to go back to business schools and at least just share that opportunity with some folks. It's not going to resonate with most of them. You may get maybe 1 to 3 people out of that entire room that's listening to you, that's interested and actually would do it. But I've had some calls with people that are just curious, like, oh, what is that? That's so interesting. It's a small program. And I think it's pretty special to give people an opportunity to go get the basic training and really be mobilization ready to deploy. So I've had a great time so far with my unit. It's been just a fantastic experience. And so I'm looking forward to doing more down the road as well. But yeah, that's really was it. It was kind of a resounding calling that never got quieter.
Yeah. Yeah. And I bet you some of those people in like the rooms you're going to talk to, because I mean, I know, I just finished up at Darden and lots of my classmates were like, Mark, I didn't know anybody in the military before I came here. And Darden's got an especially high population of veterans there. And they're like, yeah, like I had no idea who you guys were. I didn't know anything about you. I thought you were all, robot automaton idiots or something. And then I see you in the classroom and like, oh, these guys are actually kind of smart. These guys and gals are actually like pretty smart and know what they're doing. And oh, this is kind of cool. And so I can see maybe how like someone who maybe came from a totally non-military family or something, perception changes a little bit from engaging with veterans in the classroom. And it's like, this might be like something I've kind of felt that call myself in whatever various flavors or forms. How might I pursue this after school? So it's pretty cool. And I'll also add to, I've had a number of Wharton vets on the show, and I don't know like what is in the Kool-Aid up there in Philly, but I've been just like blown away by the quality of people from there. I really have been, especially the veteran community has been absolutely top notch from Wharton in every shape, form, or fashion. Not just, how they're doing, in their business and, career wise and everything, but just like as people, they're good people and I really enjoy them. So props to everyone there.
Yeah, they have a ton of support, Mark, institutionally from the administration, and that's a big credit to the school itself, making veteran support and the pipeline a big priority. So it's a very central part of what forms the class. So it's good to hear that it's being reflected out in the experience you've had.
Yeah. Yeah. So I actually want to go back to your kind of immediate post-college job of like working in M&A and everything, because I know there's some people who are listening to the show who maybe like that's what they're thinking of doing. Like they're like, okay, mergers and acquisitions. I want to work on these big deals. I want to think about, buying businesses, private equity, high finance, whatever buzzwords you want to throw out there for people. What exactly kind of like was your role, and like what did you kind of get to see, from strategic level of like why an acquisition wanted to be made and like what value that added to whoever was trying to, make that investment or acquisition?
Yeah, great question, Mark. So coming out of undergrad, the first reason I really thought about this as a career path was that candidly, it's the one that gives you the most optionality to make some future career decisions after you finish let's say your analyst program. So I went to New York to serve as an M&A analyst, and I got a chance to actually work with a firm called Centerview Partners that really prides itself on not just being transactional, but more serving as a corporate strategy advisor to CEOs and boards. So, one example was one of my clients that I had there. Of course, I'm the analyst, right? There's a VP, there's a principal, and a managing director. But the great thing about that firm is that they run pretty small teams. And so you're on a team of at most 4 people. You're either 1/4 or 1/3 often with serving those clients. And I got to be in the room meeting some pretty high level people at these companies that I had no business meeting as a 22-year-old. But really the idea being that we are their advisor to help them think about how best to utilize their free cash flow that they have on the balance sheet in the smartest way to support value creation. That could be acquisitions, it could be divestitures of certain business lines, or it could be a merger of equals or a reverse merger. So there's all sorts of different ways you can go about pursuing corporate strategy. But the idea always what came back to how do we help the company either grow or expand and create further value for the shareholders that have the stakes in the company. So a good example, Motorola Mobility, the handsets, the mobile phones division, which used to be, so Motorola used to be one company. They split off into a police and military element, and the second element is the mobile handsets, more the consumer division. So we assisted the CEO and board to spin those into two separate companies that I just mentioned, and then actually sell the handsets, the mobile handsets division to Google for $12.5 billion. So that was a good example of there was just value locked up in the company, and we split them off and let them be more appreciated. And you can give one to another company and sell it and keep the core, which was the police, fire, and military type applications for those communication devices. That's really what they wanted to retain. So doing things like that was the types of activities, the types of projects we would work on. And I found it to be pretty rewarding from an early age to be able to see that work become a solution in the marketplace.
Super cool. Super cool. Can you talk a little bit, because a huge part of this show is just kind of education for people. Like maybe they might be a year, 2 years out and just trying to figure out like what do these terms and everything mean. Can you talk about like what exactly the role of analyst, VP, principal, managing director on a team like this, and like what exactly it is that they do? And I know it's going to vary from company to company, maybe even deal to deal a little bit, but any light you can shed on that I think would be helpful for people.
Certainly. So the managing director or a partner of one of these firms, but most often an MD or managing director, is really the client relationship manager. They're the person who has the direct relationship with that CEO or with that chairman of the board, and therefore has an association relationship with the board of directors of a company. And those are the people who would hire either a McKinsey or Bain or BCG on the consulting side to think about some more of the operational or tactical level things they want to do with their company. And then they would separately hire an M&A advisory firm or an investment bank to think more kind of on the finance side. How do we properly use our cash flow? What are the strategic opportunities to buy another company, or again, divest, sell a division? That's the kind of advisor. So typically a CEO and board have two separate buckets of advisors. If you're not thinking about attorneys, it would be consultants. That's your McKinsey, Bain, BCG. And then you got more the strategic corporate finance and corporate development strategy type thing. And that's typically more your Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Centerview Partners, Evercore. Those are some of the boutiques, but that's how that's really set up. Now, further on that team, just below that could be a director, could be a principal, and that person is really in training to become that managing director. They're close. So just you have a division of responsibility there that's a little bit below that, but they're being kind of groomed to become that managing director and take over their own client relationship responsibilities. Below that is maybe a VP, or I'll just group that with an associate. Oftentimes an associate's coming out of a graduate business school program, and they are not the most junior person in the company. Think of them as more like an 03. So they have responsibility. They're managing people underneath them. But at the end of the day, they are working on teams and supporting that principal and managing director with developing materials, PowerPoint decks, Excel models, and they're kind of that go-between, the project manager, if you will, for developing those PowerPoint or Excel materials. And then below that is the analyst. And that's somebody who's coming out of undergrad and goes through a pretty rigorous process to be selected. There's a lot more people that want to do that out of undergrad business programs than there are seats. They typically work you pretty hard, and you don't have any support. There's no interns, there's no analysts below you. You're kind of just the everything of putting together the actual tactical level materials to support those, ultimately to support that client relationship and what that CEO or board wants to see from a strategic standpoint or a finance standpoint.
Okay, perfect. That was a wonderful overview, Jordan. I really appreciate that, because I know a lot of times, like when I remember being in 2.5 years ago, and you hear terms like project manager, program manager, what the hell is that? MD, principal, like aren't these guys the same thing? I don't know. So anyway, I know someone sitting there right now is like, dude, light bulb, thank you, appreciate it. So really appreciate that overview. Okay, now let's get into your personal search journey, because this is like the real meat and potatoes of this episode that I want to get into. When did like this strategy first kind of come up on your radar, and when did you decide, hey, I think this is something that I kind of want to go do?
I first discovered the concept of a search fund from reading the now it's very much out there, the Stanford GSB Search Fund Primer. It's available for free. You can just Google search it, Search Fund Primer. And it does focus on traditional search funds. I know we can kind of get into the differences between that and self-funded as the both costs and opportunities. But I learned of that from my colleague when I was working in private equity investing for the former Secretary of the Navy. We were sitting on the same floor together, and he was about to actually go to Wharton Business School. And I said, what do you want to do there? Or what are you looking at? What are you reading to get prepared? And he passed me that primer, and I just read it. And it was a similar thing to when I first heard about the Direct Commission Officer program. I just said, I have to do that. That sounds like a great fit. And it's one of the first times I had that light bulb go off and just say, that's it. That's something I need to at least look into. So when I did go to business school, I spent time with 2 successful search operators. So they had done a search to buy a company, and they successfully closed their deals. And I worked with them, and it was really within about 36 hours that I secured confirmation that was actually absolutely what I wanted to do. So went from this sounds great to this is something I'm going to focus on, and I'm going to die trying or be successful at doing it. So that's kind of was the initial diligence path of discovering this pathway.
Super cool. And what was it? Also, I just want to make a quick plug. I'm not going to say his name, but a good friend of mine from IBOLIC, who's also a Wharton grad, just completed his search and just acquired a company after I think about like 18 months or something. So Tommy out there crushing it, man. Keep killing it, dude. What was it like when you said you heard this model and you're like, oh my God, perfect fit? What was it that was like the green light go? Here's a signal I got to lean into of like, this is the right fit for me.
Yeah. So when I was doing private equity investing, so we're buying companies. So we talked a little bit about investment banking and M&A advisory. You're an advisor, you're managing director, and your principal, and your VP or associate, and yourself as an analyst. At that time, you're advising the companies, you're giving them recommendations on what to do, but you have no decision authority, and therefore really no responsibility to execute on those pieces of advice, right? You give it to them. That's up to the CEO to decide. That person's on the hook for both the success and potential failure of execution of that project or that initiative. And in private equity investing, what you're doing is you are working on teams. Instead of advising, you're actually working on teams to purchase companies. We were in the lower middle market, so that could be anywhere from as low as kind of $75 million in purchase price up to really, you can get up there to kind of $400 or $500 million in purchase price. So it's the lower middle market. There's Blackstone, Carlyle, TPG, Apollo. They're in the large cap private equity space. So they're looking to buy things that are multiple billions of dollars in terms of valuation. But regardless, what you're doing is you're putting your investors' capital, your limited partners' capital to work to buy these companies. And then it's our job to make sure that they are creating value, that we're actually executing on a strategic vision and a blueprint for the next year and 5 years. And when we did that, I kept thinking, I'd love to get involved with the operations. I want to go be with the CEO and CFO and chief strategy officer and COO and actually help make this thing work. I don't want to just invest in it. So I was always drawn to that. I would ask our operating partners who we had internally And their job is to focus on that, right? The post-closing, once you buy the company, the value creation, strategy, and actual execution of it. I'd say, hey, can I go with you? Can I go out there? And yet that was not my job. My job at that time was to focus on investing. They call that being on the investing team. So these private equity firms have an investing team and they have an operations team. The operations team supports the CEO more directly, helps make those decisions, but ultimately it's that CEO that does carry that ultimate responsibility. So I was exposed to it and was curious about it, was interested, and yet it still looked like one of those career paths where you got to go up a long ladder, right? You got to start at the bottom or come in kind of mid-level and jockey your way to the top. So that was the initial groundwork of what got me interested in operations and what I believe was part of what I was really interested in when it came to search, was the opportunity to carry that responsibility.
Yeah. I think the dynamic you just described is something that I think about a lot, in that, and I'm by no means, this massive career industry expert, but just like a general thing I kind of see in a lot of jobs is like you tend to fall on either like one side. You're either someone who's like executing on something, or you're someone who's like advising on something. And that's a very broad, gross generalization in a lot of ways. Okay. And there's pros and cons to either way. Okay. Like I was having a conversation once with my stepmom. She's been a consultant her entire life. And she's like, listen, at the end of the day, I like that I can give my advice and I can give all my counsel and everything to this person that I'm working with. And then I can go home and I'm like, I'm not responsible for it. And she likes doing, like, she puts in a shit ton of work in order to like provide that advice, but she likes being able to walk away and say, you know what, at the end of the day, it's up to you. Okay. Other people, and I'm sure there's like a lot of veterans especially, are like, no, I want to be the one kind of making the decisions. I want to be the one like with the my stamp of approval on the project or something. And so I just challenge everyone, as you're like looking at different career options, to think about which one of those things is like more meaningful to you. Do you want to be more on the advisory consulting side or something, or do you want to be more on the like action operation side? And it can change over time too. Like you can spend a couple of years doing one to prepare yourself for the other or something. But when you think about like what is providing you the most meaning, and personal value, I think it's an important dynamic to think about there.
Yeah, and Mark, there's a little nuance there too as well. So when it's easy to look at that from the outside and say, oh, okay, so you just want to just have your thumbprint on it kind of thing, or you want to just be involved so you can take credit for things like that. That's an outside view of looking at it. The way I operate the business that I acquired, I would much prefer decentralized command and elevating and nurturing and mentoring my team of leaders and managers and associates to be self-sufficient and follow the mission and intent that we're laying out and follow the strategy, and not have to rely on me as command and control to actually do, bring everything up and then I'll kind of bring it back down. And so it's more so, as you're talking about it, you just want to have more of a direct impact to actually make things better. And it's not so much self-oriented, which is the way I kind of used to think about it, which was, oh, maybe that's kind of, a lot of people do this for a reason because they just want more self-credibility. Really, it's more you have a lot to give and you feel kind of you're stunted. So in some of those teams and the way vertical hierarchies work in the corporate world, it can feel like you got to spend several years to earn the opportunity to be considered for promotion. I know it's more fluid in the private sector, but you still do have that element. When you come in as a search fund CEO, guess what? It's all on you. And you're gonna have to figure this out. And you learn faster. You get up that track faster, and you are able to hopefully enact some good strategies that make sense. So it's really about putting yourself in a position where you're giving what you do as a highest and best use to the company, just like your job is to recruit people and put them in positions where they can give their highest and best use to the company, and that creates better value overall. So
that was a great nuance to highlight, Jordan. So I appreciate that. So you mentioned, okay, we've kind of talked about how you found the strategy, why it resonated, with you personally. Then let's talk about, you ended up going on a self-directed search. Okay. Can you talk about what was the decision process there versus doing a traditional search fund where, you raise money from investors and everything? Like, why did you go to the strategy you did?
So There's a couple of reasons why you would want to go self-funded search. Well, let's just talk about the fundamental differences. When you do raise a traditional search fund, you're going to go hat in hand to these investors who have made a career, multi-decades out of being successful, really, at investing in predominantly recent MBA grads, but there are certainly people who have been working for several years in private sector. And you're going to those people to ask for them to give you bite-sized chunks of, let's call it $50,000 or let's say $100,000 a piece. You raise a couple of those, and that's kind of your search fund. And that's going to enable you to spend money while you're searching, including paying yourself a salary. Not a big salary, but something that's sufficient enough for you to feel comfortable, where you don't feel like you're having to eat, ramen noodles, trying to make ends meet, type of thing. And then also help to pay for your diligence expenses and overhead and office costs and things like that, software subscriptions, various things. So you're really getting paid for 24 months to identify and complete the acquisition of a business. Now, once you do find that company, you're going back to those same investors who gave you the search capital to fund your search fund. You're going to be asking them to put in the capital into your ultimate deal, the one that you found. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. But in any case, you're going to be able to earn up to, over the next 5 years, you'll be able to earn up to about 25% of the common equity in that company. And that's it. You will not earn more than that. No matter how well you do, no matter how great of a company you purchase, you're going to be capped at a maximum of 25%. In the search fund primer that I mentioned earlier, the actual average equity retention of those traditional funded searchers is actually 22%. So on average, that's how much they end up keeping, because there are hurdles. There's performance hurdles and there's time vesting and things like that.
Yeah. To my understanding, the usual kind of deal for most searchers is like when you walk in, let's say you raise a fund, you end up acquiring a company, the investors agree to make the deal happen and everything. Usually, you walk in somewhere with around like 8%, then you're probably getting another 8% for time vesting, and then the last 8% gets unlocked for hitting certain performance hurdles and everything. And like that's how it's like a little bit over 8%, and that's kind of how you get to that 25%. But yeah, But then and then I would love to hear kind of the other side of like the self-directed search and how that impacts that.
Yeah. So self-funded search is completely, in many ways, the opposite, in that nobody's giving you a penny. And so this begs the question, do you have enough sufficient capital? What does your burn rate look like on a monthly basis? Just cost of living. Candidly, during my search, I was just pulling it together. There's a lot of just trying to be as scrappy as possible, because during a self-funded search, no one's going to pay you anything. And I firmly believe that you do have to dedicate full time to actually give yourself a chance to successfully find and diligence and complete the acquisition of a business. It's more competitive now than it ever has been. There's a lot of businesses for sale. A lot of those businesses actually should not be sold. And there's a lot of different ways to waste time. But the reason traditional search only funds people who are going to do it full time is because even in that instance, a third of those people that are funded traditionally don't even find a business during 24 months of searching. So to think that if you're a self-funded searcher and you can do it kind of part-time or half-time and beat that metric is pretty interesting of a perspective, right? So for me though, self-funded was the answer, because I actually want to hold my business over the long term. That's the number one thing, right? Traditional search fund, as the CEO, when you buy the company, you're the CEO, right? But you are not the majority owner. You're the minority owner. And in fact, as you mentioned, Mark, you get 8 1/3% on day one, right? And then you get 8 1/3 over 5 years, then 8 1/3 if you hit certain performance hurdles. So you're a well incentivized CEO. Don't get me wrong, that's a great compensation package. You're getting a salary, 401k, healthcare, and you're getting being able to earn up to that. And so if you do really well, you can make a good amount of money. You can make a lot of money as a traditional funded CEO. But at the same time, your exit, the sale of that company is kind of out of your control. Do you have influence? Sure. You can help influence how that happens, but you are not the decision maker as to whether or not the investors decide to sell your company after 1 year or 2 years, or even let you go, right? They could do it for a non-performance based reason. Maybe they have somebody else who's been in that industry for 20 years. And they're like, well, let's put him there instead of you. How about that? So really being able to kind of control your own destiny is a big part, I think, of entrepreneurship. And if you call this entrepreneurship through acquisition, the most entrepreneurial way to do it is self-funded, because it's your company. You're going to control the destiny of it. You're going to control the timing. Maybe you don't want to sell it after 5 years. Maybe you believe that business plan can really create the most value over a 10 or 15-year horizon. If that's true, then you really should go for self-funded. And also, if you're going to put this all on your back, you're going to search for a company, you're going to find a seller, a business owner, and you're going to work with them, take them out to coffee and lunch, get to know them, negotiate, do all the diligence. You did all this yourself. Shouldn't you actually then raise the capital at that point and do the negotiations on what that investment is worth to outside investors then? So when you do that, you're able to get a lot better terms for yourself. And most importantly, as mentioned, it's negotiated, right? If you find a great company, you're going to get better terms. If you find a company that's it's a little tough, right, you may not get as good of a terms. But in either case, you're probably going to end up with substantially better common equity ownership and certainly control over your destiny through a self-funded search.
What did a normal week look like for you during your search process?
Well, a search itself is a pretty dynamic and volatile pathway. So we talked a little bit about consulting teams or M&A advisory teams and how you have all the structure and support. Well, when you're a self-funded searcher or traditional searcher, either way, it's kind of you, and you're the managing director, you're the principal and the VP and the analyst kind of thing. So your role can range from doing the tactical level analysis and doing some research. Maybe it's Saturday evening and you're thinking, I want to look into this industry. And so I'm going to spend 6 hours combing through data to try to figure out, is my thesis correct or is it wrong? Am I missing something? Or maybe it's building up a new way to find business owners. You found a new database and you're like, okay, I need to clean up this data. And sure, you can find some outside people. You can get some interns from undergrad to help you do that. But at the end of the day, you're working with undergrad interns, and often they're unpaid and they have low levels of experience. So you have to teach them. So that's a component of it. Building databases, doing research, and then during the week, Monday through Friday, being on the phone with business brokers that are selling these businesses, that are representing business owner sellers, and then also being on the phone with sellers themselves and analyzing specific companies. So once a business broker or a seller says, hey, I want to sell, I'm looking to sell my business, you're working with them, they're giving you initial information documents about the background of the company, their customer set, their suppliers, their relationships, the customer concentration, the types of marketplace they're in. You got to learn a lot in a very short period of time. So I guess that's probably the best answer, Mark, is that it really varies. It's dynamic. It depends on what your deal flow is looking like. It's a lot of marketing, really. You're a chief salesperson. You're selling yourself. You're saying, hey, I'm worth talking to if you want to sell your business. That's ultimately what you're doing. And you also have to have a good investor hat on, because you're going to invest. I mean, it's your life that you're investing. If not your money, it's your life. And you certainly want to get up to speed as much as possible on what makes a good company, what makes a good industry, and what are some red flags to sidestep so that you don't waste time, because you only have so much time, no matter how you cut it, whether you're on the clock officially or not.
Right. What were your personal search parameters? Like, did you have location, industry, size of the company? Like, what were you looking for?
So I was based out of Dallas. So I came back to, my family was from North Texas. I went to school undergrad in North Texas at SMU. And I just felt like that'd be a great network of potentially even investors to come together for an ultimate deal. And I felt like it'd be a good softer way to get introduced to business brokers and other sellers in the area. So that was the idea, to come back to Dallas. So I focused on a few different states that I personally either had family in or a personal interest in living. That's another advantage of self-funded searching as opposed to traditional funded raising outside capital, is that you can kind of set your parameters as you see fit. Some people, Oh, go ahead.
So I want to dig into this just for a second because I think it's a really important thing. I think in particular for this audience where, maybe you're coming from the military and you've kind of had to bounce around from base to base for a couple of years and everything. And you might be thinking about this as a strategy. And one of the downsides of doing a traditional search fund is, those investors are like, listen, like we want the best business possible. We kind of care a little bit less about like, your personal desires. And I'm not trying to make them sound like cold-hearted people here, but they're much more interested in the investment decision. And so what that kind of then means, like the forces at play in that decision process are then that you kind of have to cast a very wide net location wise, meaning you could be living, outside, living in Nashville, but you might have to move to Phoenix or Seattle or outside Chicago or wherever it is. You kind of have to be much less location agnostic. And I think that is absolutely one of the benefits of the self-directed search, and that you can have tighter parameters on where it is that you want to go live and take your family.
Yeah, great point, Mark. So for me, it was Texas, Colorado. I have a sister that lives there. I was looking at, outside of those two states, really maybe something around there in the Southwest region. But you find out in practice that your preferences really do show up, because if you find something, let's say in Ohio, and you don't want to move to Ohio, nothing wrong with it. But if that's not on your list, then you could find a great deal as a searcher, and you'll find a reason to kill the deal. And you won't realize that it's really just because you don't want to go there. So being true and being disciplined to what your true geographic preferences are is really important. So for me, I was really willing to go anywhere in Texas. A lot of self-funded searchers say, you know what, I want to go no further than a 100-mile radius of Dallas or a 100-mile radius of Houston or what have you. And you're right. And there's several veterans that I do support right now as searchers, and their parameters are really tight. It's around one metro area. You cannot do that as a traditional searcher. It is not allowed. They won't give you money at all to raise your search fund. But yeah, so that was kind of the geographic parameters, primarily Texas and Colorado. And then for industry wise, I was generalist, and I was willing to look at almost any type of business. During my search, I looked at software businesses. I looked at facilities maintenance. What else? Power washing, landscaping, some of those tried and true ones that a lot of searchers go after. Really something blue collar, trucking, logistics. I actually looked at some pretty interesting businesses that were supported police through software. A lot of tracking, mobile device things. Those were a little more cutting edge and tougher to fund, because there's plenty of venture capital and angels that are willing to put money behind that at ridiculous valuations that you can't really afford as an entrepreneur. But I kind of figured a lot of that stuff out the hard way in looking at these smaller businesses, because fundamentally one of my thesis, a critical component of my thesis was, hey, I'm going to be looking at really small deals. So shouldn't there be a tons of those? Shouldn't there be a ton of inefficiency in the market? And therefore I could be able to get something for a pretty good price and a great company. And one of them was a fingerprinting processing software company that served the FBI and some other police agencies. And I was like, oh, it'd be so fun to work on. What a cool technology. But let's just say if you pull out this market, the small business market is incredibly efficient in the United States of America. It is wildly efficient, and way more so than a lot of people think it is. A lot of people go to search and they say, oh, this will be easy. There's tons of sellers. They're all aging. They're going to sell me a business. Like, I'm at a great point in my career. I've got a good background, ready to get in there and operate. There's a lot of competition. And so you kind of figure that out. But yeah, I was generalist industry wise, was willing to look at anything as long as it made a good investment. It was a good deal. It was a good company with good bones. A good market.
And then, you ultimately ended up acquiring a company. So can you talk about, if you can share, what the company is, and then whatever specifics you can share about, maybe how the deal was structured, maybe how long it took to do the due diligence and kind of closing anything. Any numbers you can put out there is super helpful to the crowd.
Sure. So I got introduced to the company that I ultimately acquired. A lot of people ask, where was it? It was in the Dallas area. So there is something to putting yourself in that city. Wherever you're searching, you're probably going to be able to build the best possible relationships in that metro area, because those brokers, those business brokers and sellers are going to look at you as more credible. You're like, hey, I'm down the street. That's a lot more credible than somebody from Arizona saying, hey, I want to move to Dallas. Well, I'm going to talk to the Dallas person first, right? So, or even just extrapolating from that, Texas. Like if you, hey, I'm in Texas, and you can build that connection. So, a business broker had this company he was looking to take out to market, to sell, and this was in the fall of 2019. Ultimately, put in a letter of intent to acquire that company, and went under LOI in February of 2020. We all know what happened right after that, and went through multiple. So that was February 2020. Went under LOI, went through multiple stages of diligence. Ultimately closed the deal on July 31st, 2020, in a very tough financing environment. I had only one lender commitment letter, one lender term sheet that was willing to lend to this company. And so I still very much appreciate that belief, because everybody else was really skittish and for various reasons, right? So that was kind of the timeline of it, of successfully doing it. The equity capital raise. So I actually raised 90% of the equity cash, the actual non-debt cash that had to go into the business alongside the debt. So I raised SBA 7A loan. So that was from the debt side, but the 90% of the cash that came in was from outside investors. So I raised about 1.4 million from people that are not me or not my family, right? So outside investors, and these people are oftentimes successful searcher CEOs. They acquired companies, maybe they've sold it, maybe they still have it, but they have personal cash that they like to invest. And where do they want to put it? Back into self-funded search deals. So I was able to raise capital from them on great terms, retain majority equity control of the company, closed it July 31st. And like I said, Mark, we're trying to help other people do the same thing. That's a lot, by the way. You're doing that all while you're under LOI, trying to get all this stuff together, diligence, running your legal agreements, getting those in place, actually making sure that the company is checking out in terms of what you think it is versus what's actually there in the data and the numbers, and raising the debt, raising all that equity piece by piece, right? Sometimes $50,000 checks at a time, building up to 1.4 million is a big campaign, and you're on the clock too, because you're not under a letter of intent forever. It's an exclusivity period that's pretty limited. So and that formed the foundation of what became Search Investment Group.
Gotcha. And just a quick shout out to a previous guest, who's actually how we got connected, Lisa Forrest from Live Oak Bank. So I did an episode with her probably 50 episodes back or something like that, something like that, to kind of get the lender's perspective on searching and investing. And in particular, like, Lisa works with a lot of veterans, and so I'm not getting paid to say this from anybody. This is just, she's a cool person, and she was on the she was on the show previously, excuse me. So, and she was how we got connected. So, small world here there. Well, cool, man. So I definitely want to get into SIG and Search Investment Groups. Like, how did, I guess, one, kind of describe like what exactly it is you all do, and then like how did the pieces of the puzzle start coming together?
Yeah. So the foundation of what was Search Investment Group was really to assist with that crucial equity capital raising component when you're at that stage and you pretty much have the debt lined up, you're pretty confident about the business, and you need to raise this outside equity capital. And yet, not only have you never purchased a company before, but you've never raised outside equity capital to support a deal acquisition before. I mean, no matter my background, I had never done that before, right? So, and I felt like it back in 2020, we were flying blind. There was not any institutionalization of support for self-funded searchers. There's been decades of traditional funded mechanisms and people, and I should say groups, that have raised capital to deploy into traditional deals. But again, they'll come at the expense of those capped economics, for that entrepreneur. But for self-funded search, it was the Wild West. And in many ways, it still is. But we started out doing equity capital raising. So we turned around and helped an recent MBA graduate close his acquisition in Austin, Texas. And then last year in 2021, assisted 6 other people to close their acquisitions, and several of those being veterans. They're military veterans who got their MBAs, and they wanted to work with us to help them do it. So equity capital raising was the foundation. We also noted that we have value to give in terms of how to structure your search, how to calibrate it. So with one of those vets, he's a Marine Corps helicopter pilot veteran and Naval Academy grad, and he said, "Look, I've never done this before. I'd love to get assistance to be able to go as fast as I possibly can." And so on a weekly basis, I was on the phone with him every Friday. I would check in with him. "Hey, how are you doing? How's your sourcing engine? What do you need help with on the marketing side? Let's review your current deals. Let's take a look through all 5 of these companies that you think are worth spending time on. Let's do that together." And so we would kill 3 or 4 of those. He would go, "Thank you. You just saved me a ton of time." Right? So just being able to advise and support, having been someone who's done it, for several years, is a lot of personal tactical support that we can give to a relatively small number. Right? It's not scalable, but we can work with a couple. We call them full-time support searchers that on calibrating their search, on helping them get interns, on marketing and outreach, on campaigns and strategy, and ultimately deal reviews, and carrying them all the way, guiding them as they go into LOI. And once they get, under letter of intent with one company, guiding through the whole process from that point forward. How do you set up your diligence? What are the things that matter? What are the things that kind of don't matter, that you don't have time to really research? You can research everything, but then you're going to run out of time. So yeah, we're pretty full scope at this point.
If we kind of take the show full circle almost, so we go back to your first job post undergrad, of working in an M&A advisory firm. That's essentially in some ways almost what Search Investment Group does now for a self-directed searcher, of advising you through the process of doing the diligence, finding the deal, marketing and everything, and then ultimately raising the capital to actually make the acquisition. I'm kind of curious, from a searcher's perspective here. Do you all do I have to pay you every month, or is it a percentage of the deal or something? Like how is that structured for someone who might be hearing this and saying, "Oh, I kind of want to know some numbers here"?
Yeah. So first of all, Mark, we absolutely believe that we substantially increase the probability of success in terms of, and we define success as closing your deal, actually, making it across that chasm. And so, for example, this person I was just talking to, he started with us as a full-time support searcher in February of last year. Closed his deal, I believe it was December 22nd. So that's a pretty fast search when everybody else is thinking, 24 months, and it takes that long to do it. And you should be prepared for that. You should be prepared to go that long, have that endurance. But ultimately, we are very impatient from the standpoint of, in a good way, right? We want to go ahead and get you to be a CEO and majority owner and change your life. We're not in the business of just sitting around and just wasting time. So in alignment with that, Mark, we don't get paid anything on a monthly basis. We only get paid once you successfully close your deal. So we're on the same side of the table. We're completely aligned in terms of goal setting, and it's a small fee at closing, and it's only due at closing. It's not, if you end up winding up your search, you go, "Guys, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I got to go take a job." Hey, that's tough to hear, but too bad. That's on us, and it's all good. So we think that's the most appropriate, considering that, as a self-funded searcher who was on a shoestring budget when I was doing my search, you don't have extra cash flow to spend on advisors and fees and stuff like that. And yet, if you just do the math of expected value of what you're expected to get through a solo independent, you have no support, you're out on your own, lone wolf, and compare that to the idea of working with people who've successfully done it and have actually supported other people to do it time and time again, and know where the hidden landmines are. I think your expected value is substantially greater when you work with a team that knows how to do this. We're not here to replace the searcher. Searcher is the captain. You're running the whole thing, but you need to have a team. I firmly believe to be able to do this well. Because this is a permanent decision. Once you buy your company, you just took on several $1,000,000 of personally guaranteed debt. And you also took on maybe 10, 15, 20 different human beings who trust you with their equity capital. You're building your reputation in a much, much more kinetic way than you would ever be working at Goldman Sachs or something. I mean, this is on you.
And I mean, and not to mention, a business that has employees that's now responsible, like you need to still run this thing to ensure that, the people who are, working for you can still, go home and feed their families and keep a roof over their heads and everything too. I think it's a super important thing. It's something I kind of talk about in this show a lot is that, like, especially this audience and veterans, we're very prone to, I'm just going to beat my head against this brick wall until it collapses and I can shove my head through and figure out a way to go through it. Okay. And a lot of times, like, that is one of our superpowers, is like, we can do that. I'm also here to tell you, like, you don't have to do that every time. Okay. Like, you can't, like, that is something we have. Like, we can fucking outwork people. Okay. And like, when needed, we can run through that brick wall. But Jordan and his team are like the guys on the other side of the wall who are like, listen, we already did that. Like, our foreheads are, still have the scars. We can show you how to get around this thing easier and faster. And it's absolutely the importance of a team. And talking to some of my friends too, who've done search in any variety of fashions too, it can also be a very lonely road, right? Like, a lot of times I'm sure a lot of days it was just you in your apartment, scrolling through the internet, trying to find companies or something. And it can be very lonely. Entrepreneurship is not an easy thing from that aspect. And having people that you can kind of go to, talk to, bounce ideas off of, even just vent sometimes, I'm sure, is a super helpful and important thing to think about if this is a strategy you want to go down.
Yeah, Mark, my favorite sport I ever played was rugby. And I think one of the primary reasons was because you cannot possibly face off against 15 human beings as an independent wolf, right? As a lone wolf. You need your teammates, and they're going to all smash their heads in, to take that ball forward. And when you go down, you need someone else to cover you, right? To come over to and pick up the ball, make sure we still keep prosecuting the mission. And that's exactly right. If you are a veteran and you've successfully led teams, you didn't manage that department or division yourself. You did it with a team. You had people support you. So just remembering that, yes, perseverance, tenacity are fundamental characteristics of successful searchers and ultimately CEOs. I firmly believe that. And there's a way to deploy it. And the way to deploy it is not trying to become a lawyer and not trying to become a world-class small, medium-sized business acquirer. It's not your job. Your job is to actually buy one company and then get on to doing what you really want to do, which is build that company from, let's say, $5 million in valuation and take that thing to 20. So don't try to become an expert attorney. Don't try to become an expert, let me reinvent the wheel of how to raise capital and all the documentation needed and where do I find these people. And I will say this, there's more investors that are more public these days than there were back when I was doing it. But I'll tell you, every time we do an equity capital raise, even with our own investors, it's a battle, right? We are working on behalf of that searcher, right? Until they become the acquirer and CEO and owner, right? We're working on behalf of them to get them the best possible terms. And the way to do that is to come as a united front and put out a reasonable base case right out there that makes sense to investors, gives them a good return, but maintains the best possible equity percentage and breakdown for that searcher. If you do it alone, I'll tell you, when I was raising my capital and I didn't have that, I felt a lot of pressure. There's a lot of people who said, I don't like these economics. Let's make it twice as good for the investors. How about that? You do that, I'll give you a check. So you're having these independent negotiations. Whereas when you work with Search Investment Group, we put out one offering and that's it. There's no negotiation. We already did the work. We already did the analysis. And so that's just one example of how it's really helpful and, provides value to that searcher. That's going to matter, right? That's any percentage point of common equity matters a lot. If you believe you're going to build a company and take it from 5 to 20 million, just do the math. So
yeah,
that's a great point. It's all through team.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, Jordan, we're winding down to the last few minutes here, and I want to be respectful of your time. So in a minute, I want to pass back over to you. Just provide any last thoughts, words of wisdom to the crowd. Before we do, there's a question I always ask my guests, and that's if you can, think back on the time you spent in the Navy thus far. What has been the worst and or best chow hall you've ever been to?
Well, I heard some, from various of my teammates. They say that some of the best is on subs. I've not been on a sub to actually do that and experience what some of those meals could possibly be. So far, honestly, I can't say it's the worst, but it's just one of the ones I probably had the most experience with was up there in Newport when we were going through officer, session school. It was good. It was fine. I didn't really have too much of an issue with it at all. But I think the best is yet to come in terms of my at least experience with different chow halls. Like I said, as a direct commission officer in 2017, did a lot of reserve duty, done my annual trainings. Just got back from the East Coast for about 4.5 weeks. Didn't spend too much time in the galley, but I think there's a lot more I'm going to probably experience out there.
I have a very good friend who was a sub officer, and I think he told me a story one time. They had to live on Pop-Tarts for like 2 weeks or something like that. So that could also happen. All right. Just forewarning out for you. Well, cool, man. So Jordan, really appreciate your time today. So glad we got to connect, man. So much goodness in here for everyone listening to the show. So I just want to pass it back over to you for any parting shots you want to give out to the crowd.
Well, I think one of the things that I'd like to share is there's just like when you talk to somebody who's never been in your boots before, right? And there's that disconnect where veterans trying to relate their experience to a civilian who's never served. You kind of feel like you just can't do it. You can tell them stories and they'll have a different perception of what that can feel like, what that is like. And yet everybody knows who's listening to your podcast, Mark, that the only way to experience it is to actually do it. And only then do you figure out all those lessons learned, you figure out the best practices, and you understand with much better texture what it really means day in, day out. And I talk to a lot of potential searchers, people who are considering this career path. They want to go do it. I've talked to veterans across a lot of different ranks, actually. I mean, I've worked with people who are, 06s right now, still in the reserve. They were on active duty for maybe 15, 20 years. And they've been in the reserve for the last several years. And they reach out and say, hey, I'm really interested in this career path. And they're mid-career, right? So maybe they're a little older, but the key there is really identifying that until you do this dedicated full-time for 6 months, only then will you go, okay, now I know what this feels like. And oftentimes we talk to people before they start, they go, I got this. I'm all good. I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to knock this thing out of the park. 6 months later, they come back to me and say, all right, I'd like to talk. And I think I don't want to see people waste their time. I'd love to see them, have that vision, have that foresight and go, you know what, let's go. I want to do this the right way. And I don't want to become a world, expert, like I said, of that career path. The goal is for me to get in to be a CEO and majority owner of my own business and lead that team into greatness in the future. So I'd say it's a delicate combination of humility and also tenacity. You got to have both to be successful, not only in search, not only as a CEO, but I believe in life, no matter what you're doing, military or a civilian, private sector, doesn't matter. Those kind of it's a delicate balance, right? You got to have self-confidence, but you got to know when there's a lot that you don't have internally, and it doesn't make sense for you to build that expertise. So don't waste your time. Focus.
Great words there. Great words there. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. Really appreciate your time. If people want to find out more about you or Search Investment Group, where can they go?
Yeah, you can go to the website, searchinvestgroup.com. That's a great way to do it. Just check out some materials there. We got a lot. And if you feel like you're ready to go and you're ready to take this leap, you can reach out. We have a contact form right there. We'll come back. So one of my missions, Mark, before we go, is to support veteran entrepreneurs as much as I possibly can in this one life that I do have. So I'll be going to an MBA veterans conference this fall in Atlanta, Georgia, to talk to a lot of it's pure, it's all vets, and they're all at Masters of Business Administration programs across the country. But this is not limited to MBAs. You don't need your MBA to do this. What you need is the right attitude and the right, basic skill set and leadership, background and willingness to figure things out and take them and add them to your skill set and keep moving forward. So one of the big things we want to do with Search Investment Group is I'd love to work with and support as many veterans as I possibly can. So people should think about this very seriously and don't have this as a regret as you get older and feel like you missed out.
I'll say a few things in closing out there. So one, the MBA Veterans Conference you're talking about, I've had, Craig Griffith, who's the guy who runs it. So they're like a subsidiary of Bradley Morris, which is kind of like, one of the big JMO recruiting firms. But I know a number of my classmates went to this event from Darden and, they walked away with internship offers like from that weekend. And so, if you're going to business school this fall, whether you're first year or second year and you're a vet, like 10 out of 10 recommend going to that. Like I've only heard of nothing but good things that come from it. So highly recommend. And then I think remember too, also before the show, we were talking that you won't be able to make it. I think at least like one of your partners will be able to make it to the Southeast Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition Conference. Do you know the date on that, Jordan?
That is 9 to 10 September.
Oh, perfect. Wonderful. And also a fun fact for everyone, it's in Charlottesville, which is where I live. So I'm pretty sure it's at Darden. So if you're here, definitely give me a holler. I might try to put together a little like happy hour or something for people who show up because it'd be super fun to run into people out there who are, vets interested in this world. It'd be super cool. And then last, for those of you who are still listening, please, like, subscribe, leave a review, and let your friends know about the show. Really appreciate y'all tuning in, and we'll see each other next week. Take care.
Thanks, Mark.